back into open session. First item on the agenda is the motion to seal the minutes of the executive session held on January 7th, 2025. Do I hear such a motion? Motion by Commissioner Peterson. Is there a second? Seconded by Commissioner Browner. Roll call vote. Commissioner Susie.
Aye.
Commissioner Browner.
Aye.
Commissioner Cederini.
Aye.
Commissioner Peterson.
Aye.
Commissioner Rabideau.
Aye.
And the chair votes aye. The next item is to report out the actions taken in executive session. The commission approved the minutes of the executive session held on December 10th, 2024 by a vote of 6-0. 0, I believe it stated. Commission conducted a probable cause hearing in the matter of In re Anastasia Williams, complaint number 2024-11. The commission voted 6-0 that there does not exist probable cause to believe that the respondent Anastasia Williams, a 2024 candidate for the Rhode Island House of Representatives, violated our General Laws section 36-14-16 and 36-14-17 by not disclosing her position as community-based organizations coordinator, the City of Providence Recreation Department on her 2023 financial disclosure statement. In the matter of In re Michael D. Francesco, complaint number 2024-13. The commission voted 6-0 to determine that the matter was moot in light of the respondents coming into immediate and full compliance with the requirements of the financial disclosure mandate. I didn't say that very well, but in light of the respondents coming into immediate and full compliance with the requirements of the financial disclosure mandate. That was a 6-0 vote. And then the commission voted to return to open session by a vote of 6-0, 6-0. I believe that covers what we did in session. The next item on the agenda is preliminary discussion and voting on petition for adoption / amendment of regulations from Common Cause Rhode Island regarding gifts, financial disclosure, and procurement. And I'll turn to the executive director for that presentation.
So I'm just going to give a little bit of overview about the procedures that are happening right now. And then when I finish that, I'll turn it over to John Marion, who's the executive director of Common Cause Rhode Island, who will be presenting the Common Cause's petition to you. After he finishes, I may or may not have something to add, but I'm certainly going to be here, and we both will be here to. Common Cause Rhode Island has filed what's called a petition for rulemaking. And this is a process that is specifically permitted under the Administrative Procedures Act. So the Ethics Commission, when it adopts regulations or rules or procedures, it always has to follow the Administrative Procedures Act, as does every other administrative agency. And the Administrative Procedures Act contains a statute that specifically permits members of the public to petition any administrative agency to adopt a rule or regulation. Under the Administrative Procedures Act, when that petition comes in, the agency, and in this case, the commission, has two choices to make and must make one of these two choices. One choice is to simply deny the petition. And if you deny the petition, you have to state the reasons why you deny it. But they don't have to be any particular type of reason. You can deny the petition, give the reasons why, and that's kind of the end of it right there. The other option is to vote to engage in the rulemaking process. And there aren't really any magic actions that take place after you make that type of book. Engaging in the rulemaking process doesn't commit you to adopting the rule. It simply says that you're going to start the process of looking into the types of adopting the rule that is being requested. And looking into it may involve things such as talking about it, directing the staff to go bring you some more information at a future meeting, directing the staff to propose a couple of alternative, perhaps, regulations for you to discuss and amend and talk about and edit. It could involve holding public workshops where we solicit comment from members of the public or people who might be affected by the regulation, like the legislature or people in cities and towns, or people that are interested in the Ethics Commission. And we would do all of this in open session. So the rulemaking process is 100% a public process where everything will be in open session and on the record. At any point in this process, the commission can say, you know what, we've had it. We're not going to move forward with the process any further. Or the commission can say, let's keep going until we, and it could ultimately culminate in a vote to adopt a regulation. It could be the regulation initially as proposed by the petitioner. It could be a slightly different or very different regulation at the end of it. In order to adopt a regulation, I know earlier today I had mentioned that for everything else you do today, it's a simple majority vote. But when we get to a point where there's a motion to actually adopt a regulation, you will have to pass that by a 2/3 vote of the commission. So there are 9 members. No matter how many people show up, you're still going to need 2/3 of 9 in order to pass that regulation. And that's a relatively new requirement. That's one actually that just got added into the Constitution back in 2016 when the Constitution was amended to give us our jurisdiction back over the legislature. It was kind of a negotiation. One of the things that the commission thought, at the time it was a simple majority, and the legislature, in order to put it on the ballot, said, well, would you be willing to go with 2/3 majority? You said yes. So that's where that will go. So the rulemaking process, it's not going to start and end today. If you vote to engage in it, it just means that we'll start talking about it and putting it on future agendas. With that said, unless you have any questions about this procedure, I should also mention, it's not just the Administrative Procedures Act that requires you to do this. The commission put it into its own, it's part of its own procedures. So there is a section of the code, one of our regulations is called Petition for Adoption of Regulations, which requires the same thing, which is within 30 days of the petition for you to hold the vote today that you're going to hold one way or the other. Any questions about
Yeah,
that?
before you step back, not to prejudge or assume anything, but if we were to say yes, is there a time frame by which we are bound to reach a conclusion?
There is no time frame. You could take a year to go through 2 years to go through the process. But once the decision is made to get serious about it, then the Administrative Procedures Act does have a few hurdles that we have to pass in terms of submitting things to the Secretary of State's office, public notices, and there are timeframes for that. But we're going to take care of that. So we'll make sure that the commission is in compliance with those types.
But unlike complaint matters, we're not in 128, 108. That's all I really want to make sure.
Okay, I'll turn things over to John Marion, the Executive Director of Common Homes.
Great. Thank you, Jason. Thank you, members of the commission, for having me today. I haven't appeared before the commission.
Excuse me, Mr. Chairman, could the gentleman stand
Standing up.
up?
Yeah, sure.
Oh, I apologize.
No, it's fine. I was thinking the same thing. I'm kind of on the top of your head.
All right, thank you, sir.
You're welcome. Yeah, so just I'll introduce myself, again, John Marion from Common Cause, Rhode Island, and introduce Common Cause. We're a 55-year-old government reform organization that primarily lobbies for open, ethical, and accountable government. I run the Rhode Island office, but we're also a nationwide organization. We have a long history with the commission, going back to its founding in 1986. We were one of the organizations that lobbied the Constitutional Convention in 1986 to create the commission. And we were a big part of that effort. Jason talked about working with the commission in 2016 to restore your full jurisdiction over the General Assembly. I'm here today, as Jason said, because we wrote a letter that includes a petition for rulemaking, but also actually includes a second request that you do some research. And the three requests were: one, that the commission initiate rulemaking process to make some changes to the so-called gift rule or gift regulation, so that it categorically bars gifts greater than $25 in value or $75 in aggregate from registered lobbyists. So that's first. The second is to initiate, and I believe this is all in you received a letter in your packet, that's a memo from the staff. The second is to initiate the rulemaking process to add a question to the financial disclosure form requiring the disclosure of any gifts that are given, but for the fact that the person receiving the gift is subject to the Code of Ethics. And then the third request is that you examine Rhode Island General Laws 36-14.1 and its subsections to look at potential conflicts of interest with respect to government procurement in order to suggest potential changes. And we can talk about how those changes would have to be made in a minute. The immediate impetus for the letter, as you probably saw from both my letter and some of the media reports, was we examined all the documents, the many thousands of pages of documents released by Attorney General Noronha at the conclusion of his investigation, the state police investigation into the awarding of the Isla Group contract. As part of that, the Attorney General conducted a legal analysis that examined the facts with respect to the Code of Ethics. He only, at least in his written report, examined Section 5D of the Code of Ethics. We engaged in sort of a broader examination, looking also at the gift rule, looking at 36-14.1, because the Code of Ethics is more than just 5D. Ultimately, we came to the conclusion not to file a complaint with you against any of the people involved, but we did come to some conclusions that there are some areas with the Code of Ethics we think can be tightened. The first, as I said, is the gift rule. We think it should categorically bar gifts greater than $25 in value or $75 aggregate from all registered lobbyists. Currently, the gift rule puts limits on gifts from an interested person, which, as you know, is defined as a person or a representative of a person or business that has a direct financial interest in a decision that the person subject to the Code of Ethics is authorized to make or to participate in the making of as part of his or her official duties. So that definition of an interested person might include lobbyists. It does not categorically include lobbyists. Historically, when the commission performs an analysis of whether a financial nexus exists between the gift giver and the public official or employee for purposes of issuing an advisory opinion, for instance, in our experience, the commission sometimes, but doesn't always, include whether the person giving the gift is a lobbyist and as part of that analysis. We believe that the current rule is insufficiently protective of the public interest and can also be difficult to comply with. We believe that a lobbyist or someone who is employing a lobbyist is functionally an person, whether they will achieve a financial benefit or loss because of a decision made by a public official or employee. Yet lobbyists and those who employ them must engage in this legal analysis anytime they try to give something greater than $25 in value. A source-based rule would better protect the public interest and make compliance with the gift rule easier. Our letter has a little bit of research in it. As we stated in the letter, at least 22 states categorically limit or prohibit gifts specifically from lobbyists. I went, since sending you the letter, and looked more closely at the 6 New England states. They're always sort of the best comparables. 3 of the 5 other New England states have source-based prohibitions that specifically apply to lobbyists and those who employ lobbyists. It's worth noting that those three states, like Rhode Island, otherwise allow small gifts, but when it comes to lobbyists, there's a blanket prohibition against gifts. We don't believe that the current gift rule, which is fundamentally a general rule, should be replaced by one that is exclusively categorical. Rather, we believe that the categorical gift limit from lobbyists, the categorical gift limit from lobbyists should be done to supplement the current general rule. We note that the current general rule could be strengthened as well. At least 3 New England states, Massachusetts, New Hampshire, Vermont, have general rules on gifts that do not require proof of a financial nexus between the gift giver and the gift recipient. In those states, the burden is to show that the gift is allowed under one of the exceptions, while in Rhode Island, the burden is to show that the financial disqualifies the gift. Common Cause would support strengthening the gift rule similarly by shifting that burden. The second part of our letter asks the Commission to begin a rulemaking process for adding a question to the financial disclosure form. Specifically, we ask that the Commission add a question requiring disclosure of all gifts given to a public official or employee because they are a public official or employee. We believe that this would bring to light gifts that are neither from interested persons or lobbyists, but whose existence are still in the public interest. Though we should note here that if the general gift rule were amended, as I just described, that would probably eliminate the need for this additional question. The last time we petitioned the Commission, the only time during my time at Common Cause, was in 2012. We actually petitioned the Commission to adopt a rule to require the disclosure of out-of-state travel that is given as a gift to a public official or employee because they are a public official or employee. But that was otherwise not prohibited. We work closely with the Commission and staff to produce the current question number 10 on the financial disclosure form. And every year since the adoption of question 10, there's been news coverage of various public officials, employees who reported travel in compliance with the rule. So it's clearly, we think, in the public interest. The news uses it to share with the public. The Commission has even prosecuted several cases, including one against then Lieutenant Governor Dan McKee for failing to report travel under question number 10. We believe that public officials, employees may similarly be receiving gifts from people who are not interested persons, according to the Code of Ethics, but who nonetheless are giving the gifts only because the receiver is a public official or employee. We believe it's in the public interest to know about these gifts. So there are 3 ways we think you could proceed to deal with this request. One, you could adopt an additional question similar to question number 10, but that applies to things other than out-of-state travel. The second would be you could amend the current question 10 to include things of value in addition to out-of-state travel, or alternatively, you could simply limit or prohibit these gifts, like, as I said, 3 New England states do by shifting the burden to prove that the gift is allowable and eliminate much of the need for disclosure. Our petition did not contain specific language. I think this is important. Under the APA, we could have submitted language and said, please adopt this specific language for a rule. With respect to strengthening the gift rule and the financial disclosure statement. This was a deliberate decision on the part of Common Cause because we recognize that the Code of Ethics is a complex set of laws that interact with one another, and that it would make more sense for you to, over the course of the process Jason laid out, sort of consider alternatives for how to enact these changes, similar as to what happened in 2012 when you added question 10. And I should just add, based on your question, I think it took about 6 to 9 months in 2012. It all occurred within the calendar year. So it didn't drag on for years, but it didn't happen in the course of a couple of meetings. And there was significant, I think, public comment when it did go out for public comment. So the last request in our letter is not a request part of the petition for rulemaking. Rather, we ask that the commission review the code, that part of the code that currently addresses conflicts of interest with respect to awarding contracts and make specific suggestions for improvements. We don't yet have any specific suggestions for improvements ourselves, but we think the code could be strengthened in this area. It's worth remembering that your jurisdiction, as it was laid out in Article 3, Section 8 of our state constitution, specifically enumerates that you have jurisdiction over conflicts of interest, confidential information, use of position, contracts with government agencies, and financial disclosure. And you spend a lot of time on conflicts of interest, confidential information, and so forth, particularly financial disclosure. But you don't spend a lot of time on contracts. And that part of the Code of Ethics really hasn't been touched since 1993. And so, when Attorney General Noronha revealed the results of the investigations, he pointed out that much to his surprise, Rhode Island, unlike other states, does not have a specific statutory prohibition on what he called bid rigging. So that might be, for instance, something you could look at. So we see this as a first step in sort of rectifying that omission and making any other changes. Worth noting that that part of the code sits outside of what you have historically considered the part of the code that you amend. It's part of the code that the General Assembly created in '93 and you haven't touched. So, it would be a decision for you to make whether you wanted to suggest legislation to the Assembly or take it on and fold it into the code as you amend. So I appreciate your considering our petition and our other requests, and I'm happy to answer questions at this point.
Thank you, Mr. Marion. Members of the commission, anybody have questions of Mr. Marion?
I'd like to make a comment, sir, and I'd like to consider your response. The request for consideration of rulemaking specifically mentions including within our jurisdiction the class of lobbyists. That raises, in my mind, the question of our authority regarding jurisdiction. Our authority is based upon the state constitution. The class that we are directed to consider on this subject matter are public officials and appointed officials, not third parties, not lobbyists. I have significant reservations whether we have the jurisdictional authority to seek to impose regulations on a separate class of individuals. Also, I express reservations that when you're talking about shifting the burden under the applicable law, the burden of proof is on the commission, prosecuted. There's a presumption of innocence. There's the knowing and willful standard. I think it's a significant request that that's being addressed to us to shift the burden of proof in our deliberation. And that's my comment.
So not that I want to engage in a debate here really at this point, but I do think it's worth noting, Commissioner, that we already effectively regulate third parties in the same way that Common Cause is proposing, I think, because people who are giving the gift, lobbyists or interested persons, are third parties. Who we're regulating are the public officials who are receiving the gift. But I don't think that's really our discussion at this point.
But if I might.
Yeah, of course.
But we have established certain procedural conditions, business interests. In the business interests of flowing from the public official, there's a mutuality here. But for example, there's a comprehensive statute dealing with lobbying. There's probably 500, 600, 700 lobbyists maybe. They're required to register. There's comprehensive requirements if you look at the lobbying statute. The General Assembly has established the responsibility for compliance there with the Secretary of State. I mean, under the gift statute, so every time a public official or appointed official gets a gift, what are you supposed to do? Go to the computer to see if somebody's a lobbyist? Because if they're a lobbyist,
I think the proposal is that you just disclose it every year.
ooh, the public official, yeah, but
Yeah, public official. Not a
But-
lobbyist.
But if the public official is, receives a gift, and there's no matter pending before the public official, that gift would still be precluded.
Or required to be disclosed,
Right.
depending what we decide.
But then the government official is gonna constantly go check the computer to see if someone's a registered lobbyist.
Maybe.
Any other questions or comments at this point? Because I think what we need to make as a first call here is whether we want to engage in this process or not. I think that's what today is really before us is, do we want to look at this, start into the process, or do we simply want to say, no, we don't really want to go? Yes, at this point, I would ask if one of you has motion, one direction or the other.
Since so, I move that based upon, well, I think it would be more appropriate if the gentleman wants to respond on the jurisdictional issue.
Sure, good point.
Yeah, thank you. Chair Jones pointed out, you already do, in essence, regulate lobbyists. You received and adjudicated complaints against lobbyists over the years, going back many decades. And so I don't think this is an expansion of your jurisdiction at all. There is interaction with a part of the law that you don't control, which is the lobbying disclosure. I think it's called the Lobbying Reform Act of 2016. But it's, there are, the code of ethics interacts with other statutes you don't control otherwise. And so I don't think it wasn't intended as an expansion. The commission, as I said, often considers whether or not somebody is a lobbyist with respect to gifts anyway. This would just change it to they are automatically subject to the gift rule if they are a lobbyist. I will say it is a small population. It is, I think you're roughly right. I'm a registered lobbyist. I haven't picked up my badge for 2025 yet, but it's several hundred people. It's not in the thousands. And for 16 years, as I've interacted with dozens, hundreds of public officials, there is often a discussion about who's buying the cup of coffee or buying lunch. That is in people's minds when they interact with people who are registered lobbyists. And I think it's appropriate. I think, as I said, this makes it easier in some ways, what we're proposing, because they don't have to decide, is what I'm lobbying on, does it have a financial nexus with what your jurisdiction is and what you're considering? They would just be able to conclude, I'm a registered lobbyist, therefore this gift rule applies. As to the burden, I'm not suggesting a change to the and I may be using burden incorrectly here because I'm not an attorney, but we're not proposing shifting the burden of proof, right? So we're not saying there should be a higher standard. We're just saying that the presumption, which is another legal term, should be that the gift is subject to the gift rule unless it is part of the enumerated exceptions, of which there are many. That is how many states seem to handle gifts rather than requiring each individual gift to be subject to this analysis of whether there's a financial nexus.
If I might chime in,
Please.
we had a case recently regarding, the gift. That was the governor in the Capitol Grill in the Washington trip. Our existing system worked well. Our primary jurisdiction went to the elected official. There wasn't a barrier per se against the lobbyist activity. Sometimes when things work, try to fix a working process.
I believe the vernacular on it is don't fix what ain't broke. Mr. Graham. Please.
Just want to add a couple points to what's been said. One of the things, just to help guide you, is when you're making these decisions, is ultimately, if you're going to enact a regulation, one of the things that we'll need to show is that there's a need for the regulation. And that's under both the Administrative Procedures Act, and it's just common sense, right? In these days of deregulation. So you want to make sure that every regulation you make, the commission will have to show, is there a need for the regulation? There are other things you'll have to show too. Is this the least restrictive rule that could be enacted in order to accomplish what you're looking to accomplish? Is it economically feasible? So for each of these, I think it makes sense for the commission to guide your discussion to think about the need for each rule. So as far as the gift regulation and amendments to the gift regulation, to add lobbyists, for instance, I think it's appropriate for you to ask, if we don't do that, what are we missing? Can we think of some examples of gifts that were given that shouldn't have been by a lobbyist, that if we amended the rule would now no longer be allowed? And so I think we should look for that type of thing. And I think, we should ask for examples of that. It may be that we won't know until we do it. I also want to mention on the financial disclosure amendment petition seeking to add the new category of all gifts rather than just out-of-state travel gifts. So just to remind you, so in 2012, Common Cause did file a petition for rulemaking. Initially, the request was very similar to this request, I think, which was adopt a rule that would require disclosure of any gift, even from non-interested persons, if it was more likely than not that you wouldn't have received it, except for the fact that you're a public official. Then through the rulemaking process, we narrowed that down and said, what's really the problem? The real problem here seems to be out-of-state travel that public officials are accepting from third parties. So what if we just limit this to disclosure of out-of-state travel that people have received from non-interested persons? And that was, I think, with Common Cause's agreement that, yes, let's start there. That's fine. We were first asking for something very broad, but let's put it at out-of-state travel and see what gets disclosed. And then that was a successful disclosure. And we do see a lot of out-of-state travel disclosures, and I think they are of interest to the public and to the commission and to everyone. Going back to the question of need, again, I will say, what do we think is going to get disclosed if we broaden it back out again and say, not just out-of-state travel, but every gift? Do we think that public officials are receiving substantial gifts from non-interested persons because they're public officials? And maybe some people do believe that, and maybe some people don't know the answer to that. But so that's the problem that this proposed regulation would address. And before we address it, I think we should explore the question of, is it a problem? Do we have any evidence that public officials are receiving substantial gifts, aside from out-of-state travel from non-interested persons, it's something that we might, want, that we would probably want some information to determine. My last statement about the procurement statute, it sounds like this is not as pressing of an issue as the first two from Common Cause's perspective, but I'll leave that to Common Cause to decide. That procurement statute, I would simply say is not a part of the Code of Ethics. So we could study procurement in more detail and I suppose ask the General Assembly to look to amending that statute. I will say though that the procurement statute that we're talking about has a lot of overlap with the gift. So state vendors are already prohibited from giving gifts to procurement officials that are worth more than $25.
And is that criminal?
No, so, well, yes, so, absolutely. Also, I will just simply note that generally procurement rules are handled outside of ethics commissions, right? So procurement rules, there are procurement rules in the general laws, and the Department of Administration has procurement rules that they must follow. Every year there are proposals in the General Assembly to tighten and strengthen the state's procurement rules and change them in many ways. And that's usually done outside of the Code of Ethics. Not to say that it always has to, but I just want to give that type of overview for.
Just a procedural question. Do we vote on these 3 different rules separately, or is it intended that we're voting for this?
You mean today? You mean today?
Yeah.
You could do it really any way you want. If you were inclined to want to look at any of these a little bit more, you could vote to initiate the rulemaking process. And through that process, you could narrow or expand the question.
The procurement is not
Right.
rulemaking anyways, because the procurement statutes are outside of the Code of Ethics. We have authority to investigate and adjudicate procurement statute violations, as does the Attorney General. But it's not part of the code, so that would not be included in rulemaking.
I agree. That if you were inclined to look into the procurement issue, I think the commission should handle that separately from the rulemaking process, at least for now.
So then what we're being asked to deal with is the gifts to lobbyists and the reporting.
So you could have separate motions as to each of those
Well,
questions,
Okay, well,
each of those. Or you could have
two and one.
Right.
So is there any other discussion? Does anybody have a motion of one kind or another they'd like to make here?
Before you make the motion,
Yeah.
do you have any examples? Anecdotal or otherwise? I'm trying to envision it because obviously when we think of people abiding by the code. So
Yeah.
that's something you should report, and that's something you should report, but what is missing?
Yeah, thank you for the question. It was very deliberate what we asked the
Okay.
commission
Yeah.
because we don't know what we don't know.
Mhm.
And that's why we're asking both for a change to the rule, but also additional disclosure, because we don't know what gifts are being given that are legal under the code, but are being given because somebody's a public official. And so if you added that financial disclosure question, we might learn about big significant gifts that, you feel shouldn't be allowed, and then you would change the code to bar them. That was in 2012, or if I recall correctly, part of the discussion was, okay, let's have this travel disclosure. If we decide as a commission, that some of it is inappropriate in our eyes, then we'll go over to the code and tighten up the gift rule to prohibit some of it. The commission hasn't in the decade since done that. But I would say the reason though we focus on the lobbyists and already propose a change is both Commissioner Centerini's point about the Philadelphia trip, right? So we saw, Mr. Britt had to come before you with a there was a complaint that he had provided lunch, but, you know, the repayment of which sort of got him off the hook, for that. So, you know, we know that, and also if you read the ILO, information, there's some discussion of the gift and how to make sure that what is being given to the lieutenant governor and then the governor complies with the gift rule. So we know there are actors, including people who are lobbyists, or people we think should be lobbyists, but that's not for you to decide, who are out there trying to figure out how to get things to public officials, but also comply with the gift rule. And, you know, the other piece of evidence I would just say is that, you know, almost half the states have in their wisdom chosen to categorically single out lobbyists in this way. And so they've seen a problem there.
If I might. And the events that have caused this to come before the commission originated with a person who was not a lobbyist, a registered lobbyist. So based on that person who was not a registered lobbyist undertaking certain activities with allegedly with the governor and the Department of Administration. Now we're being asked to investigate registered lobbyists. It just doesn't, to me, it just doesn't.
We did send a letter to the Secretary of State asking him to investigate, and sanction, you know, at least one of the people who sought the contract from the governor for not registering as a lobbyist, because we think they are subject to the lobbying law. I didn't want to bring that into this because that's not your jurisdiction.
Can we, I don't actually know, I mean, listen, there's lots of news going on, so I don't know what you're talking about. Can we
Okay.
take a minute, or can we continue this so we can read whatever it is that is the impetus for this? Because I'm not sure, I don't know the background of what you're talking about, honestly.
Is that
Do you know?
something that you're
Yeah.
gonna postpone?
You could postpone this to the next agenda, next meeting, no question.
There was something about a 30-day rule.
So we have 30 days from the filing of the petition to make that vote to either initiate the rulemaking process or deny the petition. You know, conceivably, and that's just what the statute.
Okay, so my next question, because I live in extensions, is can the petitioner allow us to take more time?
Yeah,
Is that a waivable 30-day deadline, unlike the other ones?
my assumption is that the only person who would have standing to complain about the 30-day time period is the petitioner. So if the petitioner waives the 30-day limit, my advice is that would be sufficient, that would be allowed.
Could another possible way be that based upon the information or the status that we not support the request, but invite the petitioner to resubmit with greater clarity?
You could do that, you have to state the reason, so you'd be denying the petition today,
Based upon the
Stating the
information
reason.
available to the commission,
but then
but
ask.
but
Without prejudice.
without prejudice.
And I guess another question would be, we can do this, I know, but does it make sense for us to try to separate out at this point any of these for particular study and any of them that we don't want to look at at all? Or should we simply, if we're going to follow Commissioner Senatori's idea, we'd be making a motion to simply say no, but subject to.
I have reservations, as I said, on jurisdiction. The on the gift and the, out-of-state travel. I don't have reservations per se as to the request of the procurement. Since the General Assembly has already sort of made us a little bit pregnant on that.
I guess rather than just saying no today without prejudice, I would like more time to consider. So I'm gonna make a motion to continue until the next, we can do that.
Subject to approval by the petitioner.
Yes, correct.
And I'll
So
ask
that we
that in
can have
advance.
time
Would
to
you
review
object as the petitioner to postponing a decision on whether to proceed? Be taken up at the next meeting of the commission?
No, I wouldn't object to that, but I would ask, would you like us to provide additional information or your staff or both?
I'm not, yeah, it would just be a motion based on what you provided to
Postpone that?
own this
Yeah.
decision.
But we're not telling you, you can't submit additional
Yeah.
material.
Not the other option. One, I think there's one idea, but that's my motion is to continue, but
Is there a second? Sorry. I think, let me see if there's a second first. There's a second by Commissioner Bronner. Discussion, but I'm gonna let Mr. Grammett speak first here.
Want to address, what type of information you might get by continuing it for 3 weeks until the next meeting. So I think that the issue that you're not quite sure what are we talking about is the Attorney General's investigation into the ILO issue, which is an investigation that was completed about a month ago, and that the Attorney General has published his findings and report on his website, along with the findings and report of the state police investigators. It's a lot. I've read it all. It's a very dense and long report, which the commission might find interesting, but it would not be a light matter of reading it. I would suggest that that we should find a way to summarize it. And I mean, you're welcome to look it up. It's on the Attorney General's website. You may want to read the whole thing. But I think if what you're looking for is some explanation of how the results of that investigation, as published, support this petition, maybe that is something that Common Cause could provide you, or the commission, if you're inclined to continue.
Would the February meeting be more reasonable than January 28th? The February meeting is February 11th. Is that something that you'd be
That's
okay with?
close to 30.
Yeah.
I would also notice that since we're, what's happening with the Secretary of State's complaint, that's filed by Common Cause? I mean, if they move forward, I mean,
I think the issue being raised is a little bit more systemic than the immediate case, but that might have an impact on seeing that there's an agency that in fact can already address these issues adequately. I mean, I'll just say my inclination would have been, but I'm not trying to prejudge, would have been to say yes to the first two parts. So we could study them and raise all these issues in that context and then decide whether we want to do anything or not. But I also agree with Commissioner Peterson that there's a lot of information here. And so to me, it makes sense to postpone a final decision on whether we want to engage, to give everybody a chance to get a little bit more comfortable with what's involved. You've raised issues today that maybe other folks hadn't thought about, which I credit you for. So I don't want to advance the question until we're ready, but if there's no further discussion, I think I'll put the motion, since it's been a motion to continue it. The continuance has been approved by the petitioner.
To February 11th.
February 11th.
February 11th is okay, Mr. Marion?
So,
Now 30 days, right?
Well, we're asking
Getting
you
We're
if
asking for it.
Okay, that's
Mr.
fine.
Marion has sense
he's
to-
waiving a 30-day requirement, giving us the opportunity to get the
Just wanted
dig
to
in.
make sure that's it.
Plus we have 3 members who aren't here.
That's.
You know what I mean? That'll give them some time to figure out what we're getting into.
I think that's the motion for us.
I'll second.
I think it had been seconded by Commissioner Browner. I guess I'll say roll call vote.
Can you state it again?
Yeah, the motion is to continue with the approval of common cause which has been given. The consideration of common cause's petition for rule changes and review and examination of the procurement statute until the session to be held on February 11th, 2025. Is that fairly stated? Any other discussion? Roll call vote. Commissioner Susie,
Aye.
Commissioner Bronner.
Aye.
Commissioner Centarini.
Aye.
Commissioner Peterson,
Aye.
Commissioner Rabideau.
Aye.
The chair votes aye. So this will go on our agenda for February 11th. Thank you for the concession, by the way, appreciate it.
So. I don't know. Yeah, you can just one more meeting.
The next item we have is the discussion and potential voting regarding adoption or amendment of the fine schedule for financial disclosure complaints consistent with Commission Regulation 520 RICR 0000 3.30 procedure for complaints relating to financial disclosure. And then it has the old section 1023, and this one is again going to be presented by our executive director. We had material submitted earlier.
Hey, hello again. Home stretch. So this is a continuing discussion of adopting a fine schedule to informally handle only financial disclosure complaints that either allege that a complaint was late filed or that while it was filed on time, it omitted required information. We already have a schedule in place right now. But I think the commission is of the opinion, and I agree with that it's time to take a look at the current schedule and update it. Right now, it only applies to late filed complaints, and it only applies to complaints that we initiate on our own, not complaints filed by third parties. So for instance, the complaint the complaints you disposed of today wouldn't have applied under the existing schedule. So at a previous meeting, I gave a first draft proposal of fine schedules that would apply to both, and received some great feedback from the commission. To refresh your recollection, in the little memo that I included in your packet, I pulled out the entire discussion from the minutes so that we could all recall what the direction was as to how to make the second draft. I did my best to accommodate all of those in a way that I thought was workable and will make sense to all of us. And I do think that this is workable and makes sense, although we could amend it, we could keep amending, and I have no problem with revising if that's what the commission wants to keep doing. We can work at this as long as we need to, especially since we already have something in place, even if it's not as good as what we're doing. So just to quickly summarize what I've tried to do with this draft for your consideration, one of the comments, and it made a lot of sense from the last meeting, was we want to make sure that there is the ability to not follow this schedule in cases where it wouldn't be appropriate to just summarily dismiss something or give a very small fine. For instance, a scofflaw, someone who is habitually violating the statute, or even if it's a person's first time, maybe it just appears prior to an investigation to be a particularly egregious omission of information, an intentional omission of information, or information that if the public had known about it would have changed public opinion or public perception, especially in an election. So I've endeavored to do that in this draft. Right in the very first paragraph, I put in to this schedule that notwithstanding the adoption of the schedule, in any complaint, either the executive director or the respondent can elect to disregard this schedule and to proceed pursuant to the Ethics Commission's formal procedures for contested matters. Or the parties could agree to some alternative resolution to be considered by the Ethics Commission. So the idea here is that if the respondent doesn't want to go pursuant to this schedule, the respondent doesn't have to. Of course, they're entitled to all the due process that they're entitled to come before the commission. Or perhaps the respondent does desperately want to come use this schedule, but I don't feel comfortable with it. In which case I would just say no. Let's take it to the commission and you can plead your case to the commission. And we'll see what they think. Maybe they think we should have a full investigation and have an adjudication. There was one of the other comments was that it was the older one was just kind of different time frames for everything. And so I tried to consolidate the timeframes into just, one or two type of timeframes and to treat cases the same. So what we have here, just to go through it, for the delinquent statements, so the ones that are filed late, in section 1A, if someone is late, but they fix it within 30 days of the filing. So these are people who, they just missed the deadline, and maybe their opponent 3 days later wants to file, well, let's file a complaint against them and get it in the public eye. And then the person fixes it and files it within that 30 days. Here, you would be authorizing me as the executive director, if I feel it's appropriate, to administratively dismiss the complaint. And so that would just be the end. We would check, we would probably reach out to the person. You're late, but you're less than 30 days late. Can you file this immediately? Yes, I'm so sorry. If you do that, we'll administratively dismiss. They do. And that would be the end of it. The only way you would hear of it is ultimately I will report to you every case that gets administratively dismissed. I'll get more on that. For late filed complaints that are filed more than 30 days after the filing deadline, here you would be giving me the discretion to settle the matter kind of the way that we currently do, without them having to come before the Ethics Commission. If they file the late statement and if they consent to a finding of violation, they could pay $100 fine. So that's what you would be authorizing. In cases of late filed beyond 30 days, anyone could settle the complaint for $100 fine without having to go before the commission. That's for late statements. Then for deficient statements, here I've just taken out all of the timeframes and just said for all deficient statements. Once again, you would be giving me the discretion to either, based on how it looked, to either administratively dismiss it if they fix the problem and any other problems that we identify. Or I may think, the problem, it shouldn't be administratively dismissed. You were pretty negligent here. You're pretty, there were problems. Let's informally resolve it, with a $100 fine. To go to Commissioner Ritchie's point, he thought we should give discretion for you to impose up to $5. So I put that in. No more than, I couldn't informally resolve it for more than, but in an appropriate case, I could say, if you don't want to go before the commission, you're going to need to pay a $500 or a $200 or no, depending upon how the case looked. But if I thought the omission was intentional, I wouldn't administratively dismiss the case. I would bring it to you for you to authorize an investigation and do whatever you deem to be appropriate. You don't have to give me that $500 discretion. You could lower it if you you know, I don't really, either way, it's not that, it's more what you want to do. Then subsection 3, is the same thing that exists in the current schedule, which in appropriate cases, it allows me to waive or reduce a civil penalty for kind of good cause shown, which in the past, when I've used that, has been in cases where there's some hardship, financial hardship, and I'm satisfied that it exists. Or maybe, you know, there's some claims that the mail got crossed, you know, there's some type of good excuse, and for that reason, I might lower or waive the penalty. And finally, this section 4 was something that the commissioners were all concerned with, and I think it's correct to be concerned with it, and that is that any case that gets resolved pursuant to this schedule, I will, within a reasonable time, let you know. And so how I would foresee that is probably after each time I've done one of these, at the very next meeting during the director's report, I would let you know that there was a complaint filed against so-and-so. I informally resolved it pursuant to the schedule. I administratively dismissed it with no, or we entered into a consent and he paid $100 civil penalty. And then if you could ask me questions about it, and if you disagreed with what I had done, you could say, okay, maybe don't do that under those circumstances, and that wouldn't.
Is there a record of those administrative dismissals? Is there a list of them? Is it a public list already? I mean, if you resolve things in your own way, does the public know about that?
So currently, I'm not administratively dismissing cases.
Okay.
No, I don't do that. The way that we do it under the schedule is the only way to resolve a case without going before you would be for them to consent to finding a violation and either pay a civil penalty or have it waived. But it's a violation, and there is a public record of that.
Yeah, my concern is that we need to know, have some sense of developing precedence on why you're doing things the way you're doing them. So, I mean, I would think that what we might want to see, and I'm not speaking for my other commissioners, but would be a list. Matters resolved in the last month that aren't coming before us for decision, but for review, so that we can have some idea what they are. And I mean, I don't want to say this wrong. We've seen some frequent flyers, and I mean, I suppose that's going to affect your decision whether to do something or not. But I just think I'd like more information, not less. And I think unless it's not public information, I think I'd like it in writing.
Yeah, I don't see any reason why it couldn't be a list either supplied each time I talk, or, you know, annually as an annual report. Here's a list of all of the cases that were resolved in 2024 under the schedule that you adopted. And that would be a public document.
As a follow-up to both what the chair said, the Commissioner Peterson's concern, your suggestions here, do they in any way change the existing 3.30A, which reads, and I'll do it for convenience sake, complaints would solely relate to alleged violation of the code of ethics, either delinquent or deficient disclosure statements shall be processed pursuant to the procedures set forth in this regulation unless otherwise determined by the commission. That paragraph seems to address Commissioner Peterson's concern that we wouldn't have to follow a more limited schedule for compliance.
Right, I think the otherwise determined by the commission, this is the otherwise determined.
Okay, so
In my mind, that's fine.
A still will be in effect if we move forward at some point to adopt this.
We're not amending 3.30. We are just amending a schedule of fines that exists pursuant to 3.30.
That's what I'm trying to clarify.
Right.
Correct.
We're not amending 3.30 at all. That would require rulemaking.
But this schedule that we're considering finds its authority in 3.30.
Right. Correct.
All right, so A is still would be in existence for us to address concerns regarding frequent flyers. That it would address someone's argument, potential argument. I got a vested interest in this schedule. You limited your authority.
Yeah, yes, I hear the argument and I would say, no, we can still,
Okay,
we
that's
can still
all.
review you under this regular, yeah, we're not limiting ourselves.
The regulation stays, the rule stays.
And these schedules, I will also just add, we're wondering, why do we, what's so great about these schedules? It is great. From your perspective, I think it's great, and from the staff's perspective. From your perspective, you don't know how, maybe you do know. We have so many financial disclosure complaints that if we brought every one of them to you for probable cause hearings and adjudications, that's all you would be doing. We would have double the amount of meetings that we have each year for these very minor issues that can be handled administratively so simply. So that's really the purpose. It's efficiency and convenience.
Yeah, my question is that we're talking about, for deficiencies, omissions. What about errors?
Well, that's controlled by the law,
Well, I'm just, I'm,
by the court cases.
But it's a deficiency. That's the. bottom line.
okay.
Okay.
Not
Yeah.
aware.
Yeah, no, an error would be a deficiency.
Okay,
Correct.
It's not just an
not just the
omission.
omission.
It's always a deficiency. The question is whether it's a unintentional error or
Right.
an intentional one with deliberate is the.
The language is repeatedly omissions, deficiencies are omissions, and that's why I was curious about the errors.
I'm struggling with a notice issue because, and I'm looking under the delinquent side. Because you're saying that if somebody gets a complaint within the first 30 days of the due date, and they file, and they walk away happy.
Yes.
But if it's more than 30 days and somebody files a complaint, even if they come in the next day, as Mr. So-and-so did earlier today, they're still gonna be subject to the time, even though they've really only just gotten the same notice that the other people got, just happened to be within the 30 days.
Yeah. So that's accurate. If they want to have it summarily done without coming before the commission, they could still say, I don't want to pay the $100 fine. I would like to take my chances in front of the commission, tell them that they should dismiss the case and waive everything. And then you can do that. You could give me authority to administratively dismiss even in, or to pay no fine. Well, you kind of are giving me the authority to allow them to pay no fine because I'm allowed to waive the fine if good cause has been shown.
Right, in section
But it would
3.
still be a violation. It would still be.
But that would fall within the general powers when you look at the statute. The statute doesn't always require for every violation fine or an adverse, you can order compliance. That's one of the provisions that the General Assembly gave us.
Yeah, my only question was the triggering event. Whether it's fair to treat somebody one way because it happens within a certain period of time and somebody else another way because it happens a day later. Complaint gets filed on the 29th day and they get notice and they come in and fix it. They have nothing to worry about. Complaint's made on the 31st day. It's too late for them to just fix
You
it.
should have filed in the first, I mean, we're already
Oh,
giving.
no, I
people-
understand that. Don't
Gotta
get me wrong.
draw a line somewhere.
No, I'm just saying, where's the? Either party is responding to a complaint. Not as if they've gone, oh, golly gee, I missed the date. Somebody said they didn't file.
Right,
And it's just a question, well, do I learn it within 30 days and fix it, or do I learn it after 30 days and fix it? And why? In a situation, I mean, I can understand your point, don't get me wrong, but it just seems that there's a point at which we're treating, in a sense, people in moderate difference, quite different.
but that's where I think that 3 comes in. And so if it is really a minor or moderate difference, then it can be addressed as such, but the longer in time, to me, the more egregious the violation. So it's not, and I think we were getting frustrated, I was getting frustrated, I was getting frustrated with the complaints that were sniping. They were coming in like the next day, and it was for no other reason but to go through this whole process, have our time, invest the time of the commission, and it was easily fixable. It was a one-day blip, it was no problem. 30 days out, now you've missed all the reminders from the commission, which is reminding you the entire year. And you've missed the deadline, and you haven't fixed it 30 days thereafter. You're just not going to. And so that starts to lean into, it's a you problem, not an us problem for me. And so that's why I'm fine with it being a fine.
Seems a lot of these complaints seem to come during the election cycle. And, I think that there should be some flexibility because a lot of times you got first-time candidates. It's first-time candidates and, they may not be as astute in their obligations. They may be committed to public service innocently. And all of a sudden they find themselves within the complaint process of this austere commission. I think there should be some liberality.
Yeah.
And we had one of those recently.
Yes, it's still trouble.
Any other discussion? Anybody wish to make a motion?
I move to adopt the schedule.
I'm gonna second that.
So second, motion by Commissioner Peterson, seconded by Commissioner Rapidu to approve the schedule of fines and penalties for the informal disposition of complaints alleging a delinquent or deficient financial disclosure statement presented to us the January 7th, 2025 draft. Roll call vote, Commissioner Susie,
Aye.
Commissioner Browner,
Aye.
Commissioner Centerini,
Aye.
Commissioner Peterson,
Aye.
Commissioner Rabideau,
Aye.
and the chair votes aye.
Thank you. And just to, I don't know that it needs saying, but I will just say it so it's on record, that this will replace the existing schedule. So the existing schedule will no longer be on.
And the ones that are pending, are they under the old schedule or the new schedule?
Anything that is pending, my opinion is anything that's pending currently, as of right this moment, I'm free to go under the new schedule. I don't have any in mind. Honestly, I don't have any in mind. Planning to handle the new schedule, and I don't know that there are any currently that would apply to this.
What about the one that may be going to,
Joanne,
hearing,
Joanne,
the landscape?
Yeah, I'll take a look at that, but that's
I
okay.
don't know.
That's not, I don't think it falls
I don't
under
think
this.
it fits.
He's
Okay,
refusing to even talk, so.
okay.
No, I'm not, I'm going to, I'm not gonna take any action on that without coming back.
I mean, that's your option anytime, right? Is to say, I
Yeah.
don't want to do this way. I'm going to take it to commission. For any number of reasons, one of which I suggested earlier, which is, you may have a complainant you want to make sure sees the public process play out. And that makes sense to me. So, is there any new business proposed for the future commission agendas and or general comments from the commissioners? Seeing none, is there a motion to adjourn? Well, motion by Commissioner Browner, seconded by Commissioner Rabbit. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you.